we're live. Hello and welcome back to Have an Official's Blessing, a live reading of a Chinese web novel about an ancient god and his boyfriend. We'll get started in just a minute. I'm going to finish my lunch while we wait for folks to show up. Where is my folder? Here it is. Alright, that's all set up. For being such crappy frozen waffles, they are hard to cut. Hey, Jeff, welcome. Keeping true to the blood pact, Jeff. I'm so proud. Let's see. Alright, minimize that. Hello, Lobsel. Hello, Cygnus. Alright, yum. Let's get rid of that. Hopefully everyone's doing pretty well today. I'm doing alright. We were on chapter 17 of Have an Official's Blessing. Last time we met San Lang, who is our romance interest. He is a mysterious teenager looking creature, demon, ghost thing. Shi Lian, our main hero, is suspicious but can't figure out exactly what he is or who he is or why he's here. But he likes him because he's a nice guy. He's pretty chill. So they are now hanging out at his little monastery he built after the whole bride murder thing and the Day of the Dead when the ghosts were almost catching them. They had some adventures. Now we are in a new section of story in chapter 17. Still part of the first arc, which is called Blood Rain Reaching Towards a Flower, the other name for San Lang. And, yeah, we're going to continue. Chapter 17, Within Pukui Monastery, Strange Tales of Ban Yu Pass. Hey, Jessica, welcome. Alright. San Lang glanced at him, chuckling as he said, "I'm leaving for a bit." After casually dropping this line, he turned on his heels and left. Logically speaking, Shi Lian should have chased after him to ask about it, but he had a strange feeling that since the young man had already said he'd only be gone for a bit, then he wouldn't be gone for very long. He would definitely come back. So Shi Lian took the initiative and went back inside the monastery. Now remember, the last thing we dropped off on was Shi Lian had hung a beaded curtain on the front of the monastery that blocked out ghosts. And San Lang stood in front of it and just kind of looked at it, and now he said, bye. So, wonder what's going on. Shi Lian rummaged through the things he'd collected last night while wandering through the city's alleys. His left hand grasped a metal pot while his right found a cooking knife. He looked at the pile of fruits and vegetables on the offerings table and rose from his seat. After about an incense stick later, the sound of footsteps indeed sounded from outside the Pukui Monastery. These footsteps sounded neither soft nor hurried, and upon hearing them, one could easily imagine a young man walking in with a casual demeanor. At this point, the items Shi Lian had been holding in his hands had already transformed into 2 plates. He looked left and right at the stuff on the plates before letting out a long sigh. Not wanting to look at it anymore, he peered outside, and as he expected, he saw San Lang again. The young man stood outside the monastery. Perhaps it was due to the blaze of the harsh sun. He had taken off his red outer shirt and had it casually tied around his waist. He only had on a thin white shirt for his top, with his sleeves rolled up, making him look rather clean and dexterous. His right foot stepped on a rectangular piece of wood and his left hand spun a billhook machete. The machete was probably borrowed from one of the villagers. It looked dull and heavy, yet in his hands it seemed light and extremely sharp. Every so often San Lang would shave off a few slivers of wood from the wooden board, much like peeling rind. When he raised his eyes and saw Shi Lian come out, he said, "I'm making something." Walking over to take a look, Shi Lian realized he was making a door. The sizing was just right. With excellent craftsmanship, the door was beautifully elegant and had a smooth finish. Due to how the young man seemed to have come from a rich background, Shi Lian had thought he would be the type who could do neither physical work nor distinguish rice from wheat. Anyway, that means someone ignorant to common daily physical things. Who knew he was so quick with his hands? "I've troubled you, San Lang," Shi Lian said. San Lang smiled, adding no further comment. Swiftly throwing the machete aside, he immediately went to install the door. Then he knocked on it a few times before telling him, "Since you're going to draw a talisman, why not draw it on the door? Wouldn't that be better?" Having said that, he nonchalantly lifted the curtain and entered. It seemed the barrier talisman on the curtain really acted as no deterrence for him, and San Lang appeared to not care at all. What a slippery fellow. Shi Lian closed the newly made door, but then he couldn't resist opening it again. Only close, open, then close it again. Admiring how well made the door was after opening and closing it a few times, he was suddenly taken back by how senseless he was acting. On the other end, San Lang had already sat himself down in the house. Shi Lian left the door alone and brought out a plate of plain steamed buns that were this morning's offerings from the villagers, before placing them on the offering table. San Lang took a look at the buns. He didn't say a word, but quietly started to laugh again, as if he had seen through something. Shi Lian acted as if nothing had happened and poured another 2 bowls of water. Just when he was about to sit down, he saw what was under San Lang's rolled-up sleeve. His forearm had a tiny row of tattoos, and the tattooed characters were all quite strange. Noticing his gaze, San Lang let down his sleeves and chuckled as he said, "I got them when I was young." Since he let down his sleeves, it meant he didn't want to discuss the topic further. Shi Lian understood. He sat himself down before lifting his head to look at the portrait again, saying, "San Lang, you draw so well. Did you have someone to teach you back home?" He's referring to the portrait of the god that he drew for the temple, which of course is Shi Lian, because somehow this person knows what his godly form looks like. San Lang jabbed at a few buns with his chopsticks. "No one taught me. I just drew for my own amusement." Shi Lian asked, "How did you even know how to draw the portrait of the Xianli crown prince who pleased the gods?" San Lang laughed, saying, "Didn't you say before that I knew everything? Of course I'd know how to draw it." Even though this was a rather shameless reply, his attitude was magnanimous, as if he wasn't worried about raising Shi Lian's suspicion, nor was he afraid of being further questioned. Shi Lian smiled and dropped the subject, and at that precise moment a clamor arose from outside. The 2 of them raised their heads in sync and glanced at one another, only to hear someone from outside fiercely pounding on the door, yelling, "Great Immortal! Oh my gosh, it's terrible! Great Immortal, save us!" Shi Lian opened the door and saw a crowd of people standing out front, encircling the entrance. Upon seeing him open the door, the village chief called out in exultation, "Great Immortal, this person looks like he's about to die. Please, quickly save him." As soon as he heard someone was about to die, Shi Lian hastened to look, only to see that the person the villagers had surrounded was a Taoist. His hair was disheveled and his face dirty. His clothes and shoes were ripped and tattered, as if he'd been on the run for many days. It seemed as if he had just collapsed and passed out here before he was brought over. Shi Lian said, "Don't panic. He's not dead." He bent down to check the person's body. During the process, he noticed the person carried some objects, such as 8 trigrams and an iron sword, all of which were effective enchantment tools. It seemed this person wasn't an ordinary, I'm going to say this wrong, Jianghu Taoist. Jianghu is a community of martial artists and okay, so it's a fictional community of martial artists in these types of stories. A Taoist is like a priest, a monk, who follows the Tao. So this guy is a warrior monk. Shi Lian's heart couldn't help but sink at the fact. Not long after, the Taoist awoke before asking with a hoarse voice, "Where is this?" The village chief answered, "This is Pukui village." That person mumbled, "Out. I'm out. I've finally escaped." He glanced around. Suddenly his eyes widened before he fearfully said, "Help! Help! Please help!" Shi Lian had anticipated this kind of reaction. He said, "Fellow Taoist friend, what is the matter? Who should I help? What's wrong? Don't rush. Take your time and tell me clearly." The villagers also said, "That's right. Have no fear. We have a great immortal here. He will definitely settle all your matters." Shi Lian. Okay, so the story, I'm not sure how to read this verbally, but the story will often just say that a person's name and like question marks or ... to imply like that's the expression on their face, that they're not saying anything. So it just says Shi Lian, quotations, question mark, question mark, question mark. In other words, he's confused, like, okay. These villagers had never seen him perform any godly feats, yet they all seriously believed he was a living god. Shi Lian didn't know what to say, as he thought to settle all his matters was something impossible to guarantee. "Hello, Jonathan, welcome." To the person, he asked, "Where did you come from?" The Taoist said, "I came from Banyu Pass." Hearing this, everyone present turned to look at each other. "Where is Banyu Pass? Never heard of it." Shi Lian said, "Banyu Pass is in the northwest region. It's extremely far from here. How did you get here?" The person said, It was through great difficulty I could escape here." "Hello, Akatsuki. Welcome." He spoke incoherently, and his emotions were extremely unstable. In this situation, the more people around, the harder it was to speak. With everyone talking at once, you wouldn't be able to speak clearly, nor would you be able to hear. Shi Lian said, "Let's talk after going inside." He gently helped the man inside, then turned around to speak to the villagers. "Could everyone please go home and stop speculating?" The villagers, however, were all very enthusiastic as they asked, "Great Immortal, what's gotten to him? Yeah, what's happened? If there are difficulties, we'll all pitch in to help." Sadly, the more enthusiastic they were, the more they would be incapable of assisting. Feeling helpless, Shi Lian lowered his voice and solemnly said, "This could be possession." The villagers were aghast upon hearing these words. Possession was nothing to joke about. It wouldn't do for them to keep watching, so they all quickly dispersed. Shi Lian, unsure of whether to laugh or cry, closed the door. I love how often you'll recognize throughout this book, he is often unsure of whether to laugh or cry. That's often a line the translator uses. I wonder what they're translating there, that he's so often torn between laughter and and depression, I guess. Hey, Odd Molly. Alright. Sanlang was still seated beside the offering table, his hands twirling a pair of chopsticks for fun. He was squinting at the man, his gaze scrutinizing. Shi Lian told him, "It's nothing. You can continue eating." He let the man sit down, but remained standing himself. "A Taoist friend, I am this monastery's master, and I can also be considered a cultivator. Don't worry. If something has happened, you can say it. And should there be something I can help you with, perhaps I can lend what little strength I have. In regards to what you mentioned earlier, what happened to Banyu?" The man panted. It seemed that after entering a less crowded place and hearing Shi Lian's comforting words, he was finally able to calm down. He said, "Have you never heard of the place?" Yet Shi Lian replied, "I've heard of it. Banyu Pass is an oasis within a Gobi Desert." Okay, so it's part of a large desert region in Asia. Banyu's nightscape is extremely beautiful and can be described as a dazzling scenic view. That's how it got its name. That man said, "Oasis. Scenic. Those were times from 2 centuries ago. Now calling it Ban Ming Pass would be more accurate." Okay, so that's a play on words. Banyu means half moon. Ban Ming means half life. It's a horrible place to live, apparently. Slightly perplexed, Shi Lian asked, "What do you mean?" The man's complexion turned pale to the point it was frightening. He said, "Because it doesn't matter where one came from. At least half of those who travel there will disappear without a trace. Wouldn't it be more fitting to call it Ban Ming Pass? That was really unheard of. Shi Lian said, "Who did you hear this from?" "I didn't hear it from anyone. This is what I witnessed with my own eyes." Sitting up, the man continued, "There was a caravan that wanted to travel through the place. They knew of the evils happening there and had asked our whole division to escort them on their journey. In the end," his voice was filled with grief as he said, "in the end, I am only the one left." Shi Lian lifted his hand and motioned him to sit well and not get too agitated. "How many people were in your party?" "My entire sect, plus the caravan, had around 60 people. Around 60 people. When that female ghost, Swan Ji, had wreaked havoc within the course of a century, Lingwen Palace had calculated that the total number of people killed hadn't exceeded 200. But listening to what the Taoist had said, this sort of event seemed to be happening for over a century. If this many people went missing every time, adding the numbers all together would render this to no longer be a small matter. Shi Lian asked, "When did Banyu Pass first become Banming Pass?" Kutsky, they've seen those garbage exorcism films and want nothing to do with that nonsense. Hey, yeah, I'd be right with them. Nope, I'm going, bye. So, Shi Lian's noticed something that's going to come up later. The Heavenly Palace sent him to deal with a problem that had led to a couple hundred people being killed over a century. But if this guy is telling the truth, then way more people have died in this desert path than in the other place, but no one's reported it, which seems like a weird mistake. The man said around 150 years ago was probably when it started, when that place became the domain of evil. Shi Lian had wanted to ask in detail about the murders of his party and this domain of evil, but from the very beginning to this moment, he couldn't help but feel something was off. To this point, Shi Lian had no way of suppressing this feeling of suspicion in his chest. Thus, he ended the topic and began slightly furrowing his brows. Right then, San Lang suddenly spoke up. He said, "You escaped all the way from Banyu Pass?" The man said, "Yes, it was a narrow escape." San Lang made an "oh" sound of understanding, then said no more. It only took this single question for Shi Lian to perceive just what it was that felt so wrong. Turning around, he warmly said, "Then after escaping from such a long way, you must be thirsty." The man was startled, but Shi Lian had already placed a bowl of water in front of him, saying, "Here's some water, my Taoist friend. Why don't you drink some?" Facing the cup of water, an uneasy expression filtered across the man's face. Shi Lian stood to the side, both hands hidden within his sleeves, quietly waiting. "Hello, Phil. Welcome." If this Taoist really came from the northwest, all fleeing in a hurry, he was bound to be parched and starving. And looking at his appearance, it didn't seem like he had the free time on the road to eat or drink. However, after he'd awakened, he had spoken so much, yet had not brought up any request for food or drink during the whole time. Despite facing all the food and beverages on the offering table after entering the building, he hadn't displayed a single desire toward them. He hadn't even cast a single glance. He didn't really seem to be a living person. Dun dun dun! Now we're on chapter 18. And I am going to drink a little coffee. Yum. It's a ghost. That's the answer to every mystery in this story. It's a ghost! Under the gazes of the other two in the room, the Taoist man picked up the bowl of water. With his back hunched, he began to drink slowly. Through his body language, it didn't seem like he was a man who chanced upon rain amidst a long drought, but a man who was hesitant and on guard. Concurrently, as he was drinking the water, Shi Lian clearly heard the sounds of plop, 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 as though water was being poured into an empty jar. Instantly, he realized something. Grabbing the other's hand, he said, "Stop drinking." That Taoist's hand shook at him as he stared in bewilderment. Shi Lian smiled and said, "It's useless even if you drink. Isn't that right?" Having heard what he said, the Taoist's complexion suddenly changed. With his other hand, he unsheathed the iron sword by his waist and made to stab at Shi Lian. Shi Lian stood in place, motionless, before he raised a hand to block him. With a clang, he swiftly blocked the blade's edge. When the Taoist saw how he was firmly still holding his hand, he gritted his teeth and yanked away. Shi Lian only felt the arm suddenly deflate, as if it were a ball that leaked air, completely shriveling up before it slid free from his grasp. As soon as the Taoist man broke free, he fled toward the door. Shi Lian wasn't worried, because in this kind of place, where there weren't any external forces that could obstruct him, even if the Taoist man tried to run 10 feet, Ruroi would still be able to bring him back. However, just as he lifted his wrist, a sharp whoosh passed by him. The noise sounded as if someone had shot a sharp arrow from behind. It immediately pierced the Taoist man's stomach and nailed him to the door. Shi Lian fixed his gaze upon it before realizing it was actually a single bamboo chopstick. He turned to look and saw that San Lang had stood up from the table, his demeanor calm and unruffled. Brushing past him, San Lang pulled out the chopstick. He swayed it twice in front of him before saying, "It got dirty. I'll throw it out later." As for the Taoist man, despite suffering heavy injuries, not once did he utter a single cry of pain. Instead, he silently leaned against the door and slowly slid down. What gurgled and flowed out from within his stomach was not blood, but clear water. The very same water from the bowl he had just drunk from. The two of them both squatted next to the Taoist man. Shi Lian pressed down on his wound a couple times and felt as if this wound was similar to that of a punctured hole in a balloon, with air seeping out the hole. In addition, this Taoist's corpse began to change. His previous appearance was that of a robust man. Now it looked as if the person shrunk and got rid of a whole layer of fat. His face and limbs withered a bit whilst it shrunk in size, so his appearance now was similar to that of an old man's. Shi Lian said, "It's an empty shell." Some demons and ghosts weren't capable of transforming themselves into perfect human forms. Thus, they would think of other ways, creating empty shells. They would use some extremely lifelike materials to meticulously create a fake person's skin. More often than now, skins like these would be referenced off real people. Sometimes they would even just directly use a person's skin. In that case, one's palm lines, fingerprints, and hair would look entirely flawless. In addition, for an empty shell like this, so long as they didn't wear the skin themselves, the shell wouldn't be contaminated with ghostly aura, so they wouldn't be afraid of talismans that ward off evil, which would explain why the talisman on the door didn't block the man from coming inside. However, an empty shell like this could also be easily seen through, because after all, they were just hollow dummies. If no one wore the skin, it could only move according to the commands it received. In addition, these orders couldn't be too complicated, like repeated movements or ones previously set up beforehand. Thus, the appearance of the shells would usually be relatively dull and lifeless, unlike an actual living person. For example, they would repeat one or two phrases, do the same thing over and over, answer questions, or answer evasively. If they had to hold a conversation, they would quickly expose themselves. However, in regards to discerning empty shells from actual people, Shi Lian had an even more practical method. Making them drink water or eat something would be enough. After all, the shells were hollow, so they wouldn't have the 5 viscera and 6 bowels. So, 5 viscera, 6 bowels is the way that they refer to in China, or at least in ancient China. I don't know if this is like a modern thing. The liver, heart, spleen, lung, and kidney are the viscera. The gallbladder, small intestine, stomach, large intestines, and bladder are the 6 bowels. Interesting way to refer to it. When they ate something or drank water, the result would be similar to dropping something or pouring water into an empty jar. You would be able to hear a clear echo, different to a living person. The Taoist's body had completely deflated. By now it was more or less a puddle of soft skin. San Lang used his chopsticks to poke at the skin a couple times before he threw them aside and said, "The shell's a bit interesting." Shi Lian knew what the teenager was referring to. They had all observed this Taoist man's expression and demeanor and kept them in mind. Not only did he behave lifelike, he was practically a living person. When he was talking to him, he was able to reply quickly and fluently. It could be said the person controlling him possessed an astonishing amount of spiritual energy. Shi Lian gave San Lang a glance and said, "It seems like San Lang has some knowledge of this as well." San Lang smiled. "Not much." The empty shell had specially sent itself to his door to inform him of the matter with Banyu Pass. Regardless of whether the information was real or fake, Its goal was to lure him to Banyu Pass. Just to be safe, he ought to drop into the spiritual communication array and ask around. Shilian pinched his fingers and calculated his remaining spiritual energy was sufficient enough to support him through a few more uses. With that, he cast a secret art and entered the spirit communication array. He entered Heavenly Discord to say hello in the chat. Once he entered the array, he was met with the This plate is getting in my way. There we go. He was met with the rare occurrence of it being filled with bustling excitement. Moreover, it wasn't the kind of liveliness accompanied by busy official affairs, but rather one as though they were all playing some game, where they were happily laughing and giggling together. Shilian felt truly amazed before he heard Ling Wen say, "Your Highness has returned. How were your days in the mortal realm?" Shilian said, "Not bad, not bad. What is everyone doing? They're so cheerful." Ling Wen said, "Windmaster has returned and is scattering merits. Will your Highness go and snatch some too?" So merits are the, energy things that come from prayers, and so this rich god, Windmaster, is just walking around throwing dollar bills in the air, basically. Sure enough, Shilian heard numerous heavenly officials within the array shouting themselves hoarse. 100 merits! I've snatched it! I only got a single merit. 1,000! 1,000! Thank you, Windmaster! Shilian thought to himself, could this possibly be coins falling from the sky as everyone scrambled to collect them? On one hand, even though his merit chest was completely bereft, Shilian didn't know how he'd go about snatching some. On the other hand, all the heavenly officials here were extremely familiar with each other. Snatching merits from each other for fun as they joked around wouldn't matter much. It would be weird if he took part in this. Therefore, he stopped minding it and took it upon himself to ask, does anyone know about the place called Banyu Pass? The moment the words were out, the aforementioned happy, excited spirits array, still fighting over merits, instantly dropped silent. Poor guy's always a wet blanket. Hey guys, bad news! Party's over! Once again, Shilian felt slightly depressed. Previously, when he'd sent them little poems or secret recipes, it wouldn't matter if the other officials didn't respond because they didn't send things like that either. Therefore, since Shilian had sent them, he was like a square peg in a round hole. But within the array, there would often be heavenly officials asking questions in regards to official business. For example, anyone know this ghost? Are they easy to deal with? Or is anyone's domain near here and could lend a hand? During times like these, everyone would provide their own opinions. The ones with suggestions would offer them, the ones who didn't would say they'd ask around and get a chance, if they got a chance upon their return. So when Shilian inquired about the Banyu Pass, it could be considered official business. There would be no reason for everyone to turn deathly silent the moment he opened his mouth. After a while, someone suddenly shouted, "The Windmaster threw another 100,000 merits!" The array instantly became lively again. One by one, the heavenly officials began fighting over merits, which meant nobody cared about the question he'd just asked. Shilian knew that the matter at hand was probably not an easy one, so he probably wouldn't be able to inquire further within the array. In his heart, he thought the Windmaster was really generous, because 100,000 merits in a single toss was quite amazing. Shilian was just about to withdraw from the array when suddenly Ling Wen privately sent him a message. Ling Wen asked, "Your Highness, why are you suddenly asking about the Banyu Pass?" Thus, Shilian told her about how an empty shell had sent itself to his door. He continued, "The shell pretended he was a survivor that had escaped from Banyu Pass, so it's inevitable he came with a purpose. I didn't know whether or not the things he told me were true or false, so I came here to ask, what happened to that place?" On her side, Ling Wen pondered for a moment before she said, "Your Highness, in regards to this matter, I advise you not to take part." Shilian had more or less expected being told something like this. Otherwise, it was unlikely for this to have persisted for 150 years without anyone having inquired about it. In addition, the moment he asked, the whole court went silent. Shilian said, "Every time a party travels through the pass, more than half go missing. Is this true?" After a pause, Ling Wen replied, "It is difficult to speak further on this matter." Shilian could hear the deliberation within Ling Wen's tone. One thing he could be sure of was that she must be in a difficult situation. He said, "Okay, I understand. Since this is inconvenient for you, there's no need for you to say more. In addition, the two of us never had this conversation in private." What a nice guy. Am I streaming again? Yeah, we're back to normal schedule. My family's no longer in town. We'll be starting up Haunting Ground at like 4-ish, maybe a little later, and once we've finished here. Hello, Mel. Welcome. After collecting himself, Shilian left the spirit communication array. He stood up and with his broom swept the puddle of fake skin aside while muttering to himself. Then, raising his head, he said, "Sun Long, I am afraid I will be traveling to a faraway place." Though, through Ling Wen's attitude, one could tell this was not a small matter. Since this empty shell had sent itself to his door, it must have wanted to lure him into going, so it couldn't be anywhere nice. However, Sun Long said, "All right, Guga, if you don't mind, take me with you?" Finding this strange, Shilian said, "The journey will be long with arduous sand winds. Why would you want to come along?" Why would he want to come along? I think we know why he wants to come along. Sun Long laughed and said, "Do you want to know what's going on with Banyu Pass?" Shilian paused before saying, "You even know about this?" Sun Long crossed his arms and said in a leisurely tone, "The Banyu Mountain Pass wasn't originally named Banyu Mountain Pass. 200 years ago, that was the location for the ancient country Banyu." He slightly sat up straighter, with his eyes bright as stars as he continued, "Banyu's demonic cultivator is in fact..." Shilian placed the broom against the wall and was just about to sit down and listen. However, at the same time, a knocking noise sounded from outside the door. As of now, it was already nighttime. All the villagers were scared back into their homes, afraid to come out back by Shilian's words of the Taoist being possessed. Who could have knocked on the door? Shilian stood beside the door and held his breath for a moment, but he didn't feel anything unusual coming from the talisman on his door. Following that, he once again heard another 2 knocks. From the sound of these knocks, it seemed like there were 2 people simultaneously knocking on the door. He pondered for a bit before opening his door. Sure enough, 2 teenagers dressed in black stood outside his doorway. One looked bright and handsome, the other elegant and refined. They were Nanfang and Fu Yao. Remember his 2 little demigod buddies that helped out with the first mystery? They're back! Shilian spoke up. "You two." Fu Yao took the lead and rolled his eyes. Of course he did. Right off the bat, Nanfang asked, "Are you going to Banyu Pass?" Shilian said, "Where did you guys hear that from?" Nanfang replied, "A few heavenly officials were talking about it on the road. I heard you were asking about the pass today in the array." Shilian immediately understood. With both hands covered by his sleeves, he said, "I understand. I volunteered, right?" Both of them displayed distorted expressions as if it were caused by a toothache. "Yes." Shilian couldn't help but laugh. I get it. But let's agree on this first. If we come across anything beyond what we're capable of dealing with, feel free to flee at any time." At once, he shifted his body to the side and invited them inside to fill them in on the details. But who knew, the moment the 2 of them saw the teenagers sitting lopsided behind him, their originally dark complexions instantly turned ashen. Nanfang flashed inside, scrambling to place himself in front of Shilian before he yelled, "Back away!" Dun dun dun. I wonder why he's so scared of this handsome teenager. I think it's so funny that he takes on a disguise as a teenager, but he's still taller than everyone under the sun. Alright, chapter 19. "What's wrong?" Shilian asked. Sitting, San Lang spread his hands out and asked, "What's wrong?" Fu Yao frowned. "Who are you?" Shilian replied, "This is a friend of mine. Do you guys know him?" With a face full of innocence, San Lang said, "Guga, who are these 2 people?" Hearing him call Shilian Gege made the corner of Nanfang's mouth spasm as Fu Yao's eyes twitched. Shilian waved a hand at San Lang. "It's nothing, don't worry." Only to have Nanfang interrupt him with a yell. "Don't talk to him!" "What, do you guys know him?" Shilian said. Fu Yao coldly replied, "No, we don't." "If you don't know him, then why are the 2 of you being so Shilian hadn't finished his sentence when he suddenly felt something glow from both sides. When he looked back, he found that two of them were simultaneously amassing spheres of white light in their right hands. Shilian felt a foreboding premonition well up and hastily intervened. Stop, don't be so rash. The two spheres of white light that had risen from thin air sparked and looked incredibly dangerous. It was definitely not something normal people could make. San Lang clapped as if out of courtesy. Amazing! These words of praise lacked complete sincerity. With great difficulty, Shilian finally restrained their arms. Nanfang turned and angrily asked him, "Where did you meet this person? What is his surname? Where does his family live? Where did he come from? Why is he with you?" Shilian answered, "We met on the road. His name is San Lang, and I don't know the rest. He had nowhere to go, so I had him come with me. Let's not be so reckless, all right?" "You..." Nanfang held his breath and looked as if he wanted to scold him, but then he forcibly suppressed himself. He asked, "You don't know a thing about him, and yet you let him in? What if he had ill intentions?" Shilian wondered why Nanfang's tone sounded as if he were his dad. If he had been swapped with a different heavenly official, or even a different person, hearing someone younger than you speaking to you in this way would have already caused them unhappiness. But Shilian had reached a point where he'd long become completely disaffected by any berating and ridicule thrown his way. He also knew the two of them had good intentions, so he paid it no mind. Just at that moment, San Lang asked, "Gege, are these your servants?" Shilian warmly said, "The term servant is wrong. To be more accurate, they're my helpers." San Lang laughed and said, "Really?" He stood up. Conveniently grabbing something, he tossed it to Fu Yao. "Then why don't you help out a bit?" Fu Yao caught it without looking. Holding it in his hands, he tilted his head down to look when suddenly a dark aura erupted from him. The youngster had thrown him a broom. So remember, Fu Yao works for the guy in heaven who originally was a poor man that worked in a temple sweeping the floor, and so people insult him and his groupies as, clean sweepers, poor people, referencing their poor past. So he has inadvertently, wink, insulted him like he didn't know. His expression looked as if he was ready to smash both the teen and the broom itself to dust right then and there. Shilian rushed forward and swiftly took the broom away. Be calm, I only have this one broom." Who knew, just as he said it, Fu Yao released the white sphere of light in his palm. He hollered, "Reveal your true form!" San Lang didn't make any effort to dodge. He remained in his sitting position with his arms crossed, only leaning slightly to the side. The dazzling white light hit one of the legs of the offering table. When the table tilted, the tableware slid off and crashed to the floor. Shilian placed a hand on his forehead, feeling this could not continue. With a wave of his hand, Ruoi abruptly flew out and tied up Nanfang in Fu Yao's arms. The two struggled to get free, but they were unsuccessful. Nanfang raged, "What are you doing?" This is our Get Along t-shirt. Except they're not fighting with each other. This is our Get Along bandage. Shilian made the timeout gesture and said, "Let's talk outside. Outside." With another wave of his hand, Ruoi started dragging the two outside. Shilian turned around to tell San Lang, "I'll be right back." He closed the door behind him and stood in front of the monastery. He then released Ruoi, grabbed the sign in front of the door before placing it in front of the two. "Please read this and tell me what it says." Fu Yao, facing the sign, read, "This monastery is dilapidated, sincerely seeking benevolent people to donate in order to renovate, accumulate merits, and virtue." He raised his head. "A dilapidated house seeking donations? You wrote this? No matter what, you are still an ascended heavenly official. How can you write this kind of thing? Where is your dignity?" Shilian nodded his head. "That's right, I wrote it. If you guys continue fighting in there, I would be pleading for reconstruction instead of renovation. Then I would really have no dignity left." Nanfang pointed at the monastery and said, "You don't think that young man is odd?" Shilian replied, "Of course I do. If you clearly know he's dangerous, why do you still dare keep him by your side?" Shilian saw they had no intention of donating funds, so he put the sign back down and said, "Nanfang, your words aren't right. In the world, a person's dispositions and strange encounters are countless. Odd doesn't necessarily equate to dangerous. One would know to another's eyes, I must seem odd as well. But do either of you feel I'm dangerous?" This actually could not be refuted. This person clearly had fine bone structure and the refreshing appearance of an immortal, but on the contrary, collected trash all day. It was definitely weird. Fu Yao said, "You aren't afraid he's scheming against you?" Shi Lian asked, "Do you think I have anything worth scheming for?" As soon as he said that, Nanfang and Fu Yao were both rendered speechless. The question was actually very reasonable. If a person was being targeted in a scheme, it was usually because of wealth. But what was sad was, if one really thought about it, there wasn't anything valuable worth scheming for that Shi Lian would own. If one wanted money, he had no money. If one wanted treasures, he had no treasures. Unless someone resorted to coveting the scraps he collected every day. Aw, hey, Lynn Griffin. Good to see you. Hope you're having a good one. Shi Lian added, "Besides, it's not like I haven't inspected him already." The two focused their attention on him. "How did you inspect him? What was the outcome?" Shi Lian relayed the few times he'd inspected him to the two and said, "There were no results. I've already examined him to this extent. If he isn't an ordinary human, there can only be one possibility. A calamity-class ghost." Which is the highest level of ghost. Fu Yao sneered. What if he really is a calamity? Shi Lian said, "Do you really think a big-shot ghost like a calamity would be as idle as we are? Coming to a village to collect rubbish with me?" Maybe if he has the hots for, heavenly official. We're not idle. Up on the small hill outside the monastery, the three of them could hear the sound of the young man's leisurely footsteps as he walked around the building. They sounded as though he was content and without a care in the world. Nanfang dropped his tone and said, "This won't do. We still have to think of a way to test whether or not he is a calamity." Shi Lian kneaded the space between his eyebrows, saying, "Then go test him. Just don't go over the top. What if he really is only a spoiled kid who's run away from home? I get along pretty well with this kid. Be nice. Don't bully him." Hearing the phrase, "don't bully him," Nanfang's expression became hard to explain, while Fu Yao's eyes almost rolled into the back of his head. Shi Lian warned them again before he opened the door. San Long's head was lowered, like he was inspecting the leg of the offering table. Shi Lian softly called, "You're not hurt, are you?" San Long laughed and said, "I'm fine. I'm just checking to see if this table is fixable or not." Shi Lian warmly said, "What happened earlier was only a misunderstanding. Please don't take offense." San Long laughed and said, "Since you've already said so, how can I take offense? Perhaps they thought I looked familiar." Fu Yao said in a freezing tone, "Precisely, a bit familiar. So previously I was mistaken." San Long smiled brightly before saying, "Oh, what a coincidence. I also thought you two looked a bit familiar." So I think what's going on here is, without giving spoilers, the two of them have encountered Big Bad Ghost Guy before. And they think it's him, but they have no proof. And I think they're afraid of, him, obviously. And he knows they know. And he's teasing them about it and the fact that they aren't brave enough to say anything. So basically they're in a standoff. And poor Shi Lian's in the middle like, oh my god, why? Although the two of them were still vigilant, they did not make any more drastic actions. Nanfang muttered, "Clear a space for me to draw the Shrink 1,000 Miles array." Shrink 1,000 Miles was a teleportation array. As the name suggested, it could turn the distance of 1,000 miles of mountains and rivers into that of a single step. Aside from the fact that every use would expend a great deal of energy, nothing could be more useful. Shi Lian retrieved the bamboo mat from off the floor and said, "Draw it here." Earlier, when Fu Yao had entered, he hadn't gotten to examine the interior furnishings. Now, after standing in this crooked, shabby house for quite a while, he was able to see it all. As if his entire body, from head to toe, was uncomfortable, he asked, "You live in a place like this?" Shi Lian handed him a chair and said, "I've always lived in these kinds of places." Hearing this, Nanfang's movements faltered for a split second before he resumed his drawing of the array. Fu Yao did not sit, his expression also turning rigid for a second. It was hard to tell what the look on his face was. It seemed 9 parts blank shock, and 1 part schadenfreude. But he quickly hid this unfathomable expression and said, "The bed?" Shi Lian hugged the mat and said, "This is it." Nanfang raised his head, took a look at the mat before lowering his head again. Fu Yao glanced at San Lang on the side and said, "You slept together with him?" Xilian asked, "Is there a problem?" For a long time, neither of them spoke another word, so Xilian assumed there weren't any more issues. Xilian then turned his head towards San Lang and inquired, "San Lang, you were halfway into explaining it before you got cut off earlier. What happened to that Ban Yu demonic cultivator? Please continue." After arranging his... Oh, I skipped a paragraph. San Lang had been staring at them with a look of pensive contemplation, his gaze dark. Having heard Xilian call out to him, he snapped out of his daze and lightly smiled. "All right." After arranging his thoughts, he said, "The Ban Yu demonic cultivator is actually one of the ancient Ban Yu kingdom's grand tutors, namely one of the 2 demonic cultivators. If there are 2 cultivators, it obviously involves 2 people. Who's the other one?" San Lang had an answer for every question. Unrelated to the Ban Yu kingdom, a demonic master from the Central Plains called Grand Tutor Fang Xin. Xilian's eyes slowly widened a fraction before he continued on listening. As it turned out, Ban Yu's people were extraordinarily strong and partial to violence and war, and wielded great influence. They captured an important checkpoint. God. They captured an important checkpoint in the western regions of the Central Plains, causing the 2 nations to frequently intrude on each other's borders, unceasing in conflicts. Battles, big and small, erupted frequently. Their Grand Tutor was skilled with sorcery, and the troops had the utmost faith in them, willing to follow them unto death. However, 200 years ago, the king of the Central Plains finally organized an enemy to attack, utterly flattening the Ban Yu kingdom. Although the Ban Yu kingdom was extinguished, the Grand Tutor and troops' hatred and resentment did not disperse. They remained to haunt the place. Ban Yu kingdom used to be a state full of greenery, but after it turned into Ban Yu Pass, it seemed as if the evil energy had corroded the once lush scenery, and it was slowly consumed by the surrounding desert. It was said that at night people could still see the lofty silhouettes of the Ban Yu soldiers grasping a wolf-tooth club as they roamed the desert in search of prey from afar. Originally, this place had tens of thousands of inhabitants. However, all of them gradually became unable to survive, so they migrated away and left. At the same time, the legend, every time someone crosses the pass, over half would go missing, began spreading out. As long as they were people from the Central Plains passing the place, they all had to leave behind half as their illegal toll: human lives. Fu Yao put on a fake smile. "This young master sure knows a lot." San Lang smilingly said, "Not at all, not at all. It's only that what you know is too little." Xilian was unable to hold back a smile, thinking this kiddo sure had a sharp tongue. He then heard San Lang lazily add on, "Though this is merely unofficial history and some ancient tales and rumors, who knows if there really is such a grand tutor, or if Ban Yu Kingdom actually exists." I wonder if it does. I wonder if the next arc of the story will involve us finding out if Ban Yu actually exists. We're gonna find out in Chapter 20, which we will start now. This will be the last one we read. So that's Chapter 20, 1,000 Miles in a Step, Lost Within a Sandstorm. I wonder what's going to happen. It's like the title cards of a TV show that give away immediately. Like, Inuyasha used to be so bad about that. The title card of the episode would always say exactly what's going to happen. However, Xilian said, although what you've looked at are unofficial history and rumors, Ban Yu Kingdom does in fact exist. Oh? San Lang said. At this moment, Nanfang had finally finished drawing layer upon layer of the array on the ground. He stood up and said, "It's done. When should we set off?" Xilian quickly packed a bundle before making his way to the front of the door. "Let's go now." Placing his hand on the door, he said, "May the heavens officials bless us. All taboos are off," and then lightly pushed. Okay, so this is apparently a part of a Chinese saying that's kind of been twisted to suit her universe. The moment the door pushed open, the small hillside and village vanished. What stood in its place was an empty main street. Despite the main road being wide, there were in fact very few people around. Half a day could go by and one would only see a pedestrian or two. This wasn't because the sky had gone dark, but because it was less populated in the northwest to begin with. In addition, since it was near the desert, even if it was during the day, there still wouldn't be many pedestrians on the road. Gotta drink more of my coffee before it gets cold. Shilian walked out of the building and reached behind him to close the door. He looked back again and wondered, how in the world could he have just walked out of the monastery? What sat behind him was now clearly a small inn. With a single step, he had traveled 1,000 miles. A few passerbys walked by, mumbling among themselves while staring at them with guarded looks. At this moment, he heard San Lang speak from behind him. According to the ancient texts, when the moon sinks from the sky, follow the northern star and you would end up seeing Banyu Kingdom. Gege, look. He pointed towards the sky and said, "The Big Dipper." Shilian raised his head to take a look and said with a smile, "The Big Dipper! It's so bright!" San Lang came to his side and stood shoulder to shoulder with him. He gave Shilian a glance before he also raised his head and smiled. That's right. For some unknown reason, the night sky in the northwest appears brighter and clearer than the sky from the central plains. They are completely ignoring the other two. Poor Nanfang and Fu Yao are the definitions of third wheelin', because these two are immediately just like, oh, look at the star. Shilian expressed his agreement with those words. On their side, San Lang and himself were deep in conversation about the night sky and stars, while the two young martial gods behind them found the both of them to be absolutely outrageous. Nanfang asked, "Why is he here?" San Lang said innocently, "Oh, I find the traditions of ancient divination to be very mystical, so I conveniently followed for a visit." Nanfang angrily said, "Visit? Do you think we're here to sightsee?" Shilian massaged the space between his eyebrows and said, "Forget about it. If he followed us, he followed us. It's not like he'll be eating your food. I should have brought enough. San Lang, follow behind me closely. Don't wander off." In a rather obedient way, San Lang replied, "Okay." "Is the problem even about who's eating whose food?" Shilian sighed. "Nanfang, it's the middle of the night and everyone's asleep. Let's just focus on our business. Our own business. Don't mind so much about other things. Let's go." God, I love these two. I love all of them. It's so great. Guided by the Big Dipper, the four of them followed the path set straight towards the north. Having traveled through the night, the towns and greenery slowly grew scarce, while the sand and rocks on the road gradually increased. Once the earth beneath their feet ceased to be soil, that was when they officially entered the Gobi Desert. Although using the distance-reducing technique could have saved them many miles, the farther the distance, the more spiritual energy it drained. With Nanfang having used the technique once, it would take many hours before he could use it again. And since Nanfang had used up so much energy already, in consideration for the need to store some for some potential battles, Shilian wouldn't ask Fu Yao to use this technique in order to guard against the unexpected. There should at least be someone with their full energy at capacity. In the desert, the difference in temperature between night and day was drastic. During the night, the freezing temperature was cold enough to seep into one's bones, but still tolerable. Come daytime, it was a whole other experience. The sky was incredibly clear and expansive with dashes of white clouds, but the blazing sun was just as fierce. The group continued to walk, but the more they walked, the more it felt as though they were going into an enormous steamer basket. The hot air emitted from deep within the earth felt as though a day's worth of walking could steam a person alive. Shilian relied on the direction of the wind and the vegetation clustered at the base of the rocks to determine the direction they needed to head toward. Worried that some people would not be able to keep up with him, he would look back every so often. Nanfang and Fu Yao were not ordinary people. Thus, there was no need to mention how they were doing. The sight of San Lang, however, made him laugh. With the blazing sun overhead, the young man had stripped off his outer robe and lazily draped it over himself to block the sunlight. His languid expression brought about a hint of weariness. With his fair skin, pitch-black hair, and the way the red robe draped over his face, his countenance appeared even more stunning. Shi Lian took off his straw hat and lifted his hand to fasten it onto San Long's head. He said, "Here, I'll lend you this." San Long was stunned for a moment, before he smiled and said, "There's no need." He handed the straw hat back to him. Shi Lian didn't want to push back and forth on the matter, so if San Long didn't need it, he wouldn't insist. "If you need it, just ask me." He then supported his hat and continued walking. After having walked some distance, the group saw a small gray building amidst the yellow sand up ahead. They approached it for a closer look and saw the inn that seemed to have been abandoned for many years. Shi Lian raised his head to examine the sky before calculating it was already past noon. He was afraid they would approach the hottest and most trying hours of the day once it was afternoon. Moreover, they'd walked all night. It was about time for a break, and thus he led the three of them into the inn. Inside, they saw a square table, so they seated themselves down around it. Shi Lian took out a water bottle from the simple traveling bag on his back. He handed it over to San Long and asked, "Want some?" San Long nodded. Receiving the bottle, he drank a mouthful of water. Only then did Shi Lian take it back to drink himself. Shi Lian tilted his head back and swallowed a few times with his Adam's apple rolling. The cool liquid slid down his throat and felt extremely refreshing. To the side, San Long had propped his chin up on his hand and appeared to be staring at the scene, yet not at the same time. We know where your mind is, buddy, San Long. It's cool, we get you." After some time, he suddenly asked, "Is there still some left?" Shi Lian wiped the edge of his mouth, where there was still some water left. His lips were slightly moist. Nodding, he passed the bottle back to San Long. San Long was just about to take it when a hand blocked Shi Lian's hand, the one that was holding the bottle. Fu Yao interjected, "Hold on a second." While the others watched, Fu Yao slowly took out a water bottle from within his sleeve, placing it onto the table. He then pushed it towards San Long. "I also have some. Please help yourself," he said. At first glance, Shi Lian immediately knew what he was up to. With Fu Yao's personality, how could he ever be willing to share a bottle with someone else? Shi Lian also remembered how last night these two had wanted to investigate San Long further. Thus, what was in that bottle definitely wasn't ordinary water, but form-revealing water. With this secret medicinal liquid, if a normal person drank it, there'd be no effect. But if they weren't human and had consumed it, under the effects of the medicine, they would be forced to reveal their true form. Since the other two wanted to find out whether this young man was truly a devastation ghost or not, this bottle held formidable power. However, San Long only laughed before saying, "Goga and I can share this one bottle of water." Nanfang and Fu Yao both looked at Shi Lian, who was sitting at the side. Shi Lian thought, "What are you guys looking at me for?" Tone cool, Fu Yao said, "His water is almost gone. Please don't stand on ceremony." San Long said, "Really? Then you two first." Both of them stopped talking. After a while, Fu Yao spoke again. "You're the guest. You first." Although he still spoke with that refined and cultured manner, Shi Lian felt as though those words were forced through his teeth. San Long also made a "you first" gesture, saying, "You guys are the assistants. You first, or I'll feel bad." Shi Lian watched them put on airs, but when such airs were discarded, they finally got physical. Separated by the space of the table, the three of them fought with the poor water bottle, pushing it back and forth. Shi Lian felt the table tremble faintly from underneath his hands. Thinking the poor thing was going to meet its end, he shook his head in regret. His companions fought a few more silent battles. Finally, unable to hold back anymore, Fu Yao sneered. "Since you're so unwilling to drink this water, it must mean you have a guilty conscience." San Long laughed. "The two of you are being so unfriendly, and neither of you agreed to drink it first. Isn't it more like you're the ones with the guilty conscience? Could it be you've poisoned the water?" Fu Yao said, "You can ask the one sitting beside you whether or not the water contains poison." Thus, San Long asked Shi Lian, "Gege, is the water poisoned?" Fu Yao's question was really too crafty. Naturally, form-revealing water wasn't poisonous. When an ordinary person drank it was no different than drinking normal water. Shi Lian could only say, "There's no poison, but..." He had yet to finish his sentence when Nanfang and Fu Yao both glared at him. San Long, however, immediately loosened his hand and said, "All right." He lifted the water bottle and shook it a few times. "Since you said there's no poison, I'll drink it." Having said that, the boy smiled before downing the entire bottle. Shi Lian hadn't expected him to be so clear-cut. and was slightly shocked by his actions. Nanfang and Fu Yao were also stunned, both of them on guard. But who knew, after Sun Long finished drinking the water, he only shook the bottle a couple times before saying, there's nothing too great about the taste. Then he swiftly threw the bottle aside, where it made a clang upon hitting the ground and shattering. He's foiled you again! This is like attempt 8 or something of someone trying to figure out if he's a ghost or not. Clearly they need to do a seance. They need to have one of those beeping machines from the ghost shows. Just hold it up to him. Are you a ghost? Oh man, a modern AU with that kind of thing in this setting would be so much fun. Seeing how he'd drunk the form-revealing water, yet seemed completely fine, a look of bewilderment flashed across Fu Yao's face. But immediately he responded coolly. It's only water. Don't they all taste the same? What sort of difference could it have? Sun Long took the water bottle by Shi Lian's elbow before saying, of course it's different. The water here tastes so much better. These idiots are flirting with water bottles. Upon seeing this, Shi Lian couldn't help but let out a smile. He truly had not cared about the outcome of the test. Regardless of the results, he wouldn't have cared about Sun Long's identity or motives. Therefore, the chaos that had happened in front of him, aside from being amusing, there wasn't much else to it. God, you two are already so in love, and it's been freaking 2 minutes. It's been a day. Oh, I love it. Shi Lian thought things would have ended here, yet who knew, with a loud clang, Nanfang held a sword onto the table. With that kind of imposing manner at first glance, it would have seemed as though he was about to kill everyone at the scene. Shi Lian felt speechless for a moment before he asked, what are you doing? Nanfang darkly muttered, our destination is dangerous. Thus, I'm gifting this little brother a sword so he can defend himself. Shi Lian lowered his head to take a look. The sword's scabbard was plain and simple, though the sword itself seemed to have been carefully sharpened over the years. This was no ordinary good. His heart trembled. Raising his eyebrows, Shi Lian turned to the side. It's actually Hong Jin, he thought. So, there's something up with this special magic sword. Clearly it's going to end up being some kind of magic sword that if you touch it, it shows what you are, or demons can't touch it, or something. This another trick that clearly our main hero, or our love interest is going to foil somehow. We're going to stop there for today because I think 4 chapters is probably a good stopping point. Thank you for joining me. I love this delightful little story. We will continue next week with chapter 21 and the continuing desert journey that our gang of heroes is going on, our goofy gang of gay heroes who can't stop flirting with each other over water bottles. It is delightful. In about an hour or so, I will start up Haunting Ground. I'm gonna go do a handful of things, and then we'll play some game. Tomorrow will be Haunting Ground, and we'll continue watching The Untamed, which is on Discord, if you want to join the Discord and hang out with some cool folks. If you like what I do and want to support the channel, check the description for links to my memberships, Patreons, where you can get some bonus content. There's what's the word? Document is the word that has all the bonuses you can get. You can follow me on social media, all that jazz. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys in a little bit. Bye.